Welcome to part 2 of this video series in using Boris Continuum and Sapphire with Midjourney. If you missed part 1, we created some abstract images inside of Discord. We then exported those images and fed them to Continuum as well as Sapphire-based effects including S-Lens Flare and BCC Grunge. In this video, we're going to specifically explore Midjourney's zoom feature. We're going to export a bunch of stills, up-res them, bring them into After Effects and set them up for animation, and then use Continuum as well as Sapphire for the final effects. Let's dive right in. Okay, if you're new to Midjourney's zoom feature, first of all, we have to create an image, up-res it, and then we have access to it. So let me use the Common Imagine prompt, and I'm going to type in here a 1960s hockey player shot on an outdoor ice rink with a 35mm lens. And I'm going to specify a couple things. So I will use the parameter AR for aspect ratio 16:9 with that dash dash, and also use the dash dash no parameter. I'm going to type in the word no green, which should try to avoid the color green in the image and things that might involve green. Let's see what it comes up with in terms of the 4 images once I press that return key. Okay, here are the results that Midjourney came up with. And it happens that I like the one on the lower left. That is number 3. So I'm going to up-res that by pressing the U3 button. Now that this is up-resed, I have options to the zoom feature. There are 3 that we'll go over. Number 1 is I can choose zoom out 2 times, which will zoom out this image 2 times with no input. The same thing if I do zoom out 1.5 times. But the trick to making this your own happens to be with custom zoom. Once I click on this button, if you're familiar with Remix, something here is very similar where we can actually create a text prompt that will define our zoom out. So the trick here is actually not to reuse the same prompt. In fact, I'm going to completely get rid of what I just typed. I'm going to type here in Montreal. I'm also going to follow that with removing the no prompt. I'll keep the aspect ratio of 16:9, and I'm actually going to change the zoom value. It's set to 2 right now. I'm just going to set this to 1.7, but you can define this the way that you want. Again, the trick here with zoom out, especially with custom zoom, is to define what you'd like to see on the outer regions of your image. Once I do, I'm going to submit this. It's going to give us 4 options to choose from. Okay, here are the 4 images it came up with. Once you find one that you like, I kind of like this one with the building on the right. Obviously, it would be ideal if the hockey player had an entire hockey stick, but we'll stick with this and I'll choose U1. And I can then continue to zoom out on this new up-resed image. But the end goal is to produce quite a few of these and then also save these to your system so that you can connect these inside of After Effects. So in this case, I would right-click this newly produced zoomed out image and save this image to my system. And I would do the same thing for the original image up here. Still missing that hockey stick. Let's see what happens after we've downloaded these images. Midjourney doesn't give us quite something to work with when it comes to video. It's not even HD in quality. If I draw your attention here in my Finder to some previously downloaded images and double click this so I can preview this, and then go to Tools and show this in the inspector, see that it is shy of that 1920 by 1080 resolution. So since we're working within the Adobe ecosystem, we'll use Photoshop to up-res these images to HD and even go further with super zoom and the neural filters. I'm going to hop inside of Photoshop where I have this exact photo. First thing that we'll do is you'll want to double click your layer just to make sure it's not a background for this task. Then by going to the image menu, let's choose canvas size, and you'd want to define a width and height. In this case, I'll do HD. Okay, we can see that the canvas grew. And under the Photoshop menu here, we want to go to settings and we'll just choose general for the time being. Here under technology previews is an option enabled where you can do a preserve details to upscale. So what this means is when I select this layer, press Command T, and then start to scale this up, it's going to try to preserve those details with that technology preview. Okay, so that's option number 1. I'm going to press return to accept that. And to show you option number 2, we're going to go somewhere where we can see the neural filters, something you might need to download. In this case, I'll go to the filter menu and we'll head to where it says neural filters. And here at the side is an option for super zoom. Now you may need to download this if there's a cloud icon next to it. I'll enable this And here at the side, I can decide how much I want to zoom in on this image. Let's go 2 times in this case. You can see it starts to process on the computer. We can start to play around with any artifacts that we might want to remove if it's a JPEG, noise reduction and sharpening. In this case, we don't need this. And once we're satisfied, we can press OK. Now, if something's happened in the background, I'm going to just press Command 0 so we can see the entire image. But a new Photoshop document was created, an untitled document. If I go to the image menu and we take a look at the canvas size, that is Ultra HD, 3840 by 2160. Here is the original document where we have the 1920 by 1080 image that we use the technology preview for. Regardless, there are multiple options you can use to upscale Midjourney images inside of Photoshop before bringing in After Effects. Let's continue that story there where we're going to create the animation and then add Continuum and Sapphire effects. Okay, I'm here inside of After Effects, and I just so happen to have a stack of images I'd like to use that I've already sequentially named, 1 through 12, for an example. I'm just going to select all of these images and place them into a new comp, a single composition with a still duration of 15 seconds. At the top, we have the most zoomed out image, and here at the bottom, I'll just solo this. This is the most zoomed in image. What we want to do is work with this and the I2, which is the second most zoomed out image. For this, I'm going to move the zoom I above the I2. We'll have to change this layer order for this example. And first off, I'm just going to select the scale of I1 and bring that down to 50%. Now, what we want to do is make sure that these images are perfectly aligned. And one great tool to our device is blend modes and difference. When things are not different, this is going to be completely black. Now, to show this to you, I will toggle my switches and modes. And on the zoom I layer, let's switch the mode here to difference. You can already see that they're closely aligned, but if I zoomed in, there is a little bit of an offset. And this is going to happen in certain zoomed in images. We can use our arrow keys here to try to perfect this until we see black. If we're not getting what we want, we just start to move this around until we get as close as black as possible. I'm going to press Shift P to show the position value of zoom I1 along with the scale value. Now, one thing I've noticed is that when you get really close, we can kind of repeat this with the other images inside of our composition. This is stage 1, right? So here's your V2 image, and there's V1. These are looking pretty good. I would make this normal again. So now we can see both of these images. And then on the I1, and one thing is that we want to smooth out the edges of that image. So let me just turn off the I2 image. We should be just looking at the I1 here. You can see there behind the frame. I'm going to double click the ellipse mask just to place it on the still. Press V to select the default selection tool, and then drag in on the ellipse points, followed by pressing F for feather on the layer. So it just blends in nicely with the zoom 2 image. So this is just 2 images out of 12. We're going to repeat this for each of the other 10 images, but I'm just going to take you through one more so you get the hang of it, and then I'll show you how to connect these all at the end. Okay, so now that this is hooked up, it's really important for us to take the zoom I1 and pick whip it to the I2. And now I'm going to select the I3 layer, bring it here to the bottom, take a look at the I2 that's on top, press S for scale, and now bring this one down to 50%. So you should see that this is a postcard on the wider image. And just like before, change the mode to difference. And one thing I'll do right now is just copy the position values of the I1 and try to paste that to the I2. Usually these would be really similar, which is a really helpful thing, although sometimes Midjourney images are off even further. Okay, so that's looking good. And again, we would connect the zoom I2, we would parent it to the zoom I3. Kind of reminds me of the game of Operation. Okay, let me turn off the difference mode for the zoom I2. Just come back to you after I've connected all of these layers so we can set this up for a successful animation. Okay, I've now connected everything successfully. And just to demonstrate this with the bottom 2 layers, I'm just soloing I11 and I12 and showing a couple things. I11, you can see that there's a mask on it. If I press F, there's some feather around it. If I toggle my switches and modes right now to show you, difference mode, it's completely black where this 11 card exists. And the same is true as we go into each of the other layers. They are all connected to each other through parent and linking and have been scaled down appropriately. Okay, let me just turn this back to normal, the I11 layer, and unsolo everything. And we need to do something just to hook up the zoom animation. So first off, I'm going to select zoom I11 to I1, and we're just going to pick whip everything now to I12. Now that that's set up, we need to do something to guide this layer because this is what we're going to scale up. And we want it to be eventually in the center of I1. In order to do this, I'm going to press A for anchor point on I12. And on I1, press P for position. We're simply going to pick whip the anchor point to the position value of I1 and then just close that out. And now we can scale up this image. So I'll press S for scale, add a keyframe at the 0 frame mark in my timeline, move to 15 seconds at the end of my composition. So we're going to need to scale this up quite a bit. So since there are 12 images, all that are smaller from the other, I'm going to estimate right now a value of about 1200 in terms of zooming in. And we're close. We're not quite zoomed in fully on the I1 layer. In fact, I'm just going to solo that so you can see it. We can still go a little bit further. So you might want to try to shift click on that keyframe a bit and then get even closer to your desired result. Now let's just see what we have here. The zoom in isn't quite natural. So what we need to do is just change how these keyframes are responding. The quick trick for this is to select the name scale. And then from the animation menu, we're going to use the keyframe assistant, in this case, exponential scale. A ton of keyframes are going to show up there on your zoom I12 layer, but we're now going to have a smooth zoom in. This is what we're looking for that smooth animation effect. And then once this is set up, we can now play with what effects that we might want to add. We might want to reverse the animation altogether in another composition. Let's just go to the end here. One great thing about this shot is I will add an adjustment layer to this comp. And this suits itself well based on its angle. If I add the adjustment layer above all of my layers here in the composition, well to a Sapphire preset. In fact, I'll type in S_effect and search for a built-in preset for a tilt shift. So apply that to the adjustment layer. And in this case, I want to load a preset inside of S-Effect. If you don't know this, one great thing about S-Effect is that there are a bunch of filters combined to give you different looks. In some cases, these looks are a lot better than you can get with just one effect or filter. Under search presets, I'm just going to do the search for tilts. And there is a simple and an advanced tilt shift effect. I'll just use that for the time being, although it's not going to work the same on every image. Okay, here is this preset applied to our adjustment layer and affecting all of our zoomed in stills. I'll just turn this effect off and on so you can see the highly saturated look as well as the shallow depth of field. If we take a look at the properties of S-Effect here, we can go into the toy look and of course just bring down the blur amount. I want you to pay attention to just the small amount of parameters under this group. And the same thing is true for the in focus area. If I click on that, I can actually grab on the crosshair and choose another area to keep in focus, as well as play with the radius, as well as go to the defocus section, and play with the focal depth and the overall depth of field. Let me change that to a value of 0.2. And I'll also just go into the color adjust section and bring down the saturation overall. It was brought up to a value of 1.5. I'm going to just bring this down to 1.2 so it's not as saturated. Now, obviously, if I move earlier in time to the beginning of this composition, this tilt shift effect might not work as well on this particular shot, but that's not stopping us from, during the zoom in, to eventually fade towards this look. So with my adjustment layer selected, I'll just press T for opacity. I'm going to move to the 10-second mark, and I'm going to add a keyframe, making the opacity value 0, and then slowly as we get to this overhead perspective, set the value of the adjustment layer to 100. Now, last but not least, I just want to go inside of S-Effect and show you how this builder effect was created. In fact, I'm just going to go into Edit Effect, and this is going to bring us into Sapphire Builder. At the very bottom, I like to consider these blocks that you work with or the actual effects that were used to create the look that you saw. And if I click on toy look, this was actually S edge aware blur. And only certain properties that are checkmarked is what we see inside of After Effects. So someone went through here, added S edge aware blur, changed its name, added SZD focus, just chose these properties here, followed by distort perspective and color adjust, again controlling the properties that were brought into After Effects for you to control to give you this overall look. And now let's take a look at another zoomed in example. Now, it just so happens that I did something similar by using both Continuum and Sapphire effects in another example. So let me show you this zoom in result. So I'm here inside another composition. This involves 30 photos that have been placed together to give this zoom out effect. So taking a look at this comp, there are the 30 layers. Use the same connection trick with the anchor point and everything being parented to the last layer here. And then after pre-comping it, I was able to play and remap the time of how long this zoom in took. There's an adjustment layer in this composition that contains several effects from BCC Plus as well as Sapphire. One effect that was used was Sapphire Ultra Glow. And if I twirl down the parameters, you can play with both the brightness and the threshold to get your desired look. One of the coolest part is that you have an afterglow included in this, so you can get double glows, not to mention beautiful edges for neon-based effects. In addition to Ultra Glow, I use Light Flicker, and under Light Flicker, by controlling the flicker randomness, not to mention its speed and amount, we can get a desired flicker effect, whether it be a pulsating type look or just a rapid flicker. Next, I added BCC Prism just to add some chromatic aberration, which you might be able to see around the edges of the image. And last but not least, played with BCC Plus wide angle lens just to have a different perspective as we travel through the scene. So you can see this in a few different shots. I'll just move forward and we can see the distorted lens, how you can play with both the distortion value, not to mention the X and Y correction. The best part is, once you have your Midjourney images set up inside of After Effects upscaled, and then you're scaling in on it, you can use our collection of effects in both Continuum and Sapphire to get the animation that you want. For more tips and tricks just like this, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as check us out at borisfx.com.